Hello, class, and this is your professor. I want you to do really well on Microeconomics Exam 4. So, as kind of give you a leg up, we'll just look over the materials here. It covers 40 questions. There's about 10 questions per uh, chapter: consumer choice, behavioral economics and risk taking, health insurance and healthcare, and international trade. So to navigate into those, I thought we would jump right into the PowerPoints, which you'll find down here. And the first PowerPoint is on consumer choice. And after you review all of the various PowerPoint slides, you'll get down to practice what you know. So why don't we do a little bit of, assuming you've done all that and you're kind of just prepping for the test, why don't we see where you're doing? So which one of these is true? That marginal utility generally diminishes with additional consumption of a good? Yes, that's usually true. So marginal utility is the extra benefit that you get from eating, say, consuming one more unit. So if you're really hungry, the first hamburger you have is delicious. The second one is pretty good. The third one is not as delicious or satisfying as the first one. You have the law of diminishing marginal return. So A would be the correct answer there. What's important as well is that the ones that are not true, and that those are often mistakes that people make. How about this next one? Which of the following would most likely illustrate an example of negative marginal utility? This is where you're actually worse off. So, giving the hamburger example, let's say you were really hungry and you were gaining marginal utility each time you ate a hamburger, but you get to a point where you eat one more and you're actually worse off after eating the eighth hamburger than you were after eating the seventh one. That was what we would call negative marginal utility. So eating too much food and an all-you-can-eat buffet would be the answer there. Next one, practice what you know. If I consume more of good Z, what happens? So as I consume more of good Z, does the price of good Z fall? No. Will the price of good Z rise? Possibly. I don't think I have that much influence on good Z though, so probably not. My marginal utility of good Z will fall? Yes, because it's just like that first question. And my total utility for good Z will increase. I'm happier with three hamburgers than I am with one, but but the benefit of the third one, that's the marginal or additional benefit I got, is what you're comparing when you're trying to decide it. And that's where it brings us up to what looks like a complicated formula, but all it's saying is the marginal utility of consuming one more X divided by the price of X. So you're saying, I'm thinking about buying a fourth hamburger. And let's say a fourth hamburger would give me some marginal utility divided by the price of a fourth hamburger. Or I could go to the movies. And I haven't been to the movies yet, so the marginal utility of going to the movies is very high. And even though the price of the movie is more than a hamburger, when I take a look at how much benefit I would get from going to the movie, compared to eating a fourth hamburger, I find that the marginal utility divided by the price of the movie is greater than the marginal utility of the fourth hamburger divided by the price of the fourth hamburger. And that's what's being illustrated there, right? Although it applies to everything, not just consuming movies and consumer goods and hamburgers and things like that, but it includes like extra education. Is it better for you to go spend money and time getting your PhD, or is it better to put that effort and time into starting your business? Right? So these explanations for some people, the answer is choice A, and for other people, it's choice B, and it depends on the price and cost from their point of view, as well as the marginal utility, which is subjective from their point of view. So if you want to optimize utility, and that's what we're trying to that's what consumer choice theory says that we're trying to do, optimize utility. The consumer should, in this case, buy more Y, and possibly buy less X. Um, the That would be D. Practice what you know. If the price of a good rises, okay, consumers tend to purchase less of that good. Yes. And why is that? Because their marginal utility hasn't changed, but the price has changed. So the ratio of utility to price is getting worse. And so people will buy less of it and they say, well, if for all that extra money, I'd rather do something else. And so that's called the substitution effect because you're purchasing one thing for something else. And that would be how you would answer that question. Now, the next chapter is health insurance and healthcare. And likewise, you could go through all of those. And I recommend that you do review all of those PowerPoints. But as you get down to these last questions, you kind of sum up this, and I assume that you've done this as I'm getting you ready for the exam. So when we think about human organs, for instance, it's a market. There's suppliers of human organs, there's demanders of human organs, and the uh, uh, fact that there is a shortage of human organs tells us that the market is not being allowed to operate very efficiently. In any market where there's efficient suppliers and demanders, no barriers of entry, and free competition, there's no shortage will last very long. It corrects itself. It's self-correcting. So the fact that there's a continued shortage of human organs tells us that there's a problem, some kind of restriction on trade. And that's the case, certainly. So we have, the demand for human organs is basically a question of life or death. So the supply of human organs has to do with the uh, cost of being a supplier. And in some cases, it's illegal. Other cases, it's life-threatening. In some cases, it's poor information, lack of compassion, number of different things that add up to low supply, high demand. So there haven't been legalized markets where kidneys and dollars are exchanged in the United States. However, healthcare providers have seen some success with kidney exchanges where there's two people that need a kidney. Family A can't give to patient A because there isn't a match, but someone in family A has a match for patient B, and someone in patient B's family has a match for the patient A's family, and they do an exchange like that. And then they do a simultaneous procedure where there's exchange for life, because that's of course another issue about the supply is that you might be willing to give, but you're incompatible with the person that you wanted to give to. So this would be an example of making the market more efficient. And when we think about the healthcare, and the market for healthcare, the overriding lesson that I'd like you to know is that when you adopt free market principles, you have efficiency. You have you don't have shortages, you have lower prices, you have more choices. It's better for the consumers, it's better for the suppliers to have open markets. But when you have government control or monopoly markets, then you have inefficiencies. So, all right, let's practice what we know. How is healthcare different from other goods we consume? Well, healthcare is often financed through intermediaries such as insurance companies, and that's not typical. So it's C. What we mean there is that, as you know, that people are mainly interested in health. That's the real good is health. The next best thing to health is good health care. The next best thing to that, a derivative, if you will, of health care is possibly health insurance. And people talk all the time about insurance as if that's the thing that people really want and need, but what they really want and need is good health. The next best thing to that is health care. And the fact that we talk so much about insurance is actually a political arrangement, if you will, to distract you from the true purpose and the causes of sickness and unhealth that we see so prevalent in America. Right? We spend more per patient in the United States and per citizen actually on healthcare, and yet we rank something like 24th in the world for health. So we spend a lot, but we don't get a good bang for our buck. What's the reason to explain why healthcare is such a large portion of GDP? And that is because is the demand for healthcare elastic? No, it is very inelastic. So it's not A. Consumers are willing to consume more healthcare because insurance pays most of the marginal cost of care. Yes, that's true. So and once you have the healthcare insurance, you go and people are disconnected from the decision on whether to how expensive something is because they don't have to pay for it. They're expecting the insurance to pay for it, and so it does drive it up. So B is at least some a possible contender for this one. Our population is getting younger, and young people take more risks. That is not true, uh, and difficult to prove as well. And people are taking better care of themselves and buying a lot of home healthcare products. That is not true either, not generally, and it certainly wouldn't explain why healthcare costs are running amok. So the answer is B on this one. Okay. Suppose you pay insurance premiums but don't get sick. What happens? The insurance company keeps your money. There it is. Not A, not B, not C. Must be D. The insurance company will use your premiums to pay the expenses of another insured customer who did get sick. Well, that's one way to say it. Another thing is the insurance company puts the money that you gave them in their pocket. And they overcharge you on purpose because they know that they have to collect enough money from all of the people paying health insurance to pay for some very expensive procedures and for prescriptions and for all of the doctor's visits and all of the mandatory things that might be out there that they're expected to pay for. Plus, they got to pay for their advertising and their compliance and their offices and their vacation and their workers and their own salaries and their pensions and their profits. So that's why they charge what they do. How could the problem of adverse selection in adverse insurance markets be solved? Now, in order to answer that question, you'd have to know what adverse selection is. And adverse selection is when someone who knows they're at high risk chooses to buy insurance so that because because they know that their chance is better than average, that they're going to collect on the insurance that they're going to have. You know, if let's say that if a typical person has a 2% chance of a bad thing happening to them this year, and uh, and the insurance is priced based upon an expectation that a person who's buying insurance is 2%, someone who has a 5% chance of that bad thing happening will see that that buying the insurance is a bargain, and they will seek it out and pay for the insurance, even if it's expensive. So to solve that problem, you could do a couple of things. You could make sure everyone is forced to buy insurance, and that's what they do with auto insurance. So even the people that are safe drivers have to pay a lot for their auto insurance each year, and not buying insurance is not an option. This is also essentially what's behind the Affordable Care Act, that they force everyone to purchase um, medical insurance as a way to prevent the let's say the death spiral of adverse selection that I showed you in that video. And then um, and so D is the correct answer. Another way to solve the problem of adverse selection would be to charge such a high rate of insurance that only those people that have adverse effects. You know, if the average American has 2% chance of the bad thing happening, but 10% of Americans have a 20% chance of the bad thing happening, you don't price your insurance for the 90%. You price the insurance for the 10%. That way, only people who have the high chance of the bad thing happening are the ones buying the insurance. And that's the way that's often done as well. Lastly, question or slide 57. Which of the following situations illustrates an example of moral hazard? And this is a great one. If you understood the term moral hazard, you'd also understand that there's a moral compact, that there's um, a principle that people are essentially going to live their life in such a way that protects themselves and doesn't do undue harm. They don't go out of the way to do harm to others. And that's the moral compact. So certainly there's exceptions to that, but that's the moral compact. When you have somebody who has insurance, and that insurance causes them to take more risks with other people's lives and other people's property, then you have created moral hazard. A good example of this was when the banks were getting bailed out by Congress. The banks took huge amounts of risks to to profit and line their own pockets. And when Congress bailed the banks out, the banks got the message that it was okay for them to take huge risks with the economy. And this is what we call moral hazard because they were willing to do something that was very risky because they themselves were not at risk of losing anything. They were only as long as things were good, they would make a profit. And if things turned sour, that Congress would bail them out. So we're going to see if there's another example here. If it's not the banks, it'll be something else. Patty waits to have a baby until she has health insurance that will cover a hospital visit. Maybe, right? So she doesn't want to take the risk of until she has the insurance. So what we see is she's behaving one way without insurance and acting another way with insurance. So that's kind of an example of moral hazard. Roger is afraid of going to the dentist? No. Doug gets a flu shot because he doesn't want to get sick? No. Skeeter's having terrible stomach pain, so he goes to the emergency room? No. So I guess for this, not quite on the scale of the bank bailout, but that's the answer that they're looking for on this one. The third of four chapters is international trade. And let's do the same thing with this one as well. What you're doing is you're not learning facts exactly. What you're learning in this course is how to think about different problems, different situations. So, here's a case against protection. And when we think about this is a good slide to go through, right? When we look at this, should we protect our industries from a foreign competition? Should you protect them by putting up tariffs and barriers, quotas, and whatnot? And there's a case for, if you will, protection. And then there's the three traditional arguments for protection are that it's a national security argument, the infant industry argument, it's a new industry, it's small, it needs to be protected, or that we don't want our industries to be destroyed by foreign companies dumping, and that's where they produce so much inexpensive, cheap goods that they flood our market with it, and it's nothing that we can compete with, and so that's the dumping argument. And so the arguments in favor of protection are here, and the case against protection, the arguments against those very three things are all spelled out in these slides. I assume you've done it, so let's get right into the globalization here. So you'll have to know words like quota and voluntary uh, restrictions and in order to answer some of the questions on this test. I think there's only about 7 questions on the test actually from this particular chapter, but you'll find it in there. And lastly, we have probably more than that, 12 to 14 questions on behavioral economics. I Find this area to be especially interesting. Very good. What the behavioral economics is a kind of the overlap of economics and psychology, where we're looking at not what a person who is looking at all these choices m might choose to do if they were perfectly rational, but instead understanding what people are doing when they make a choice and understanding some of the logical fallacies that they make as well. So the there's some for instance, there's uh, this concept of bounded rationality. And bounded rationality means that even though we can make choices, that's the rationality part, it's bounded because we find it's incomplete information. We don't have the capability of understanding fully all of the choices. And so, simply put, you might have 10 choices, but you are only aware of three of them. So you choose the best choice you can from the three choices you're aware of as you understand them. When people, for instance, um, think about buying a lottery ticket. Many people don't buy lottery tickets, right? And why don't they? Because they perceive that the cost is higher than what they would benefit. Just like the reason you don't buy anything else. When you don't buy something, the value that you perceive is low, and the cost that you see is higher than the value. So you don't buy it. But when people do buy lottery tickets or they take a game of chance or anything else, they're um, have a perception that they're getting something from that purchase, or then that might be a chance of winning. It might be just the uh, mental vacation that it takes. It might be that other people are doing it. It could be if it's an addiction, it doesn't count because that's not a choice, right? So we don't try to explain that using economics. But if someone says, "No, I could have chosen not to buy a lottery ticket. In fact, I was looking at these different lottery tickets or scratch offs, and I chose the one that I think is probably the one that hasn't been used yet, that probably has a winner. I'm not going to go with this, those green ones or those red ones. I'm going to try the purple one or that teal one or something like that because of something." And it's the behavioral economics of it is that we understand that there's a certain amount of influence that's subconscious in their decision, but yet there's also a conscious portion of their decision. So it's a genuine decision, so it is economics, but much of it is influenced by let's say the pretty colors or the glitzy lights or the advertising that went with it, and on a subconscious level is stimulating them and responding to them the way Pavlov's dog was. So it's not, but it's also still rational because there is decision making taking place. So that's what's and we ought to get a couple ideas here. For instance, the I won't go over the whole slide because I do it elsewhere in another video here, but I wanted you to do well on the test, and there are questions about this. For instance, you've got to distinguish between the gambler's fallacy and the hot hand fallacy, and the those are terms that definitely apply to gambling and often say like shooting dice or playing cards, but it also applies to all sorts of other things in life. Basically, when people act like, well, when someone makes a error of judgment, it's a fallacy. When they are mistaken in their thinking, it's a fallacy. So any logical fallacy. Now, these two fallacies are alike in that they both times the person acting uh, behaves as though they're not good at math. In the case of the gambler's fallacy, they believe that the current trend, and many times let's say it's a negative trend, they believe that because they've lost the last seven times in a row, that this next time they're going to have to win. So instead of realizing that their chance of winning is what it actually is, they think that they have a higher chance of winning because they've been on a losing streak. in the hot hand fallacy, it's the opposite. They think that the next thing that they do is going to be a winner because they've been on a winning streak. If they've won the last 5 times in a row, this next time they're definitely going to win because they got hot dice. They're doing well. They can't lose. They're that both of those are mistakes when you instead of actually looking at the odds, you think somehow that there's the trend is going to continue when it's just chance. Okay. So then there's a slide on the difference between framing and priming effects. There's a good and what I think is an easy question on the test about that. The status quo bias is this belief that whatever things are will remain. And this is a very common piece when when I talk to people who are a little bit concerned about the end of the world or something like that, but they still believe they're going to have the internet. They still believe they're going to have their phones working, so they don't mind, even though they believe that we're on the verge of Armageddon. They put their money into Bitcoin, and I don't know how they're going to cash in that Bitcoin if they don't have electricity and some kind of internet to connect to. But they usually can't seem to come up with an answer there that um, actual gold makes sense, but I don't know who you're going to trade the gold with. If someone knows you have gold, you're going to have little pieces of gold. I don't know who you're going to trade with if everything is in total chaos. What's to keep somebody from? Anyway, we won't go digress. The status quo bias, a belief that the way things are the way they'll always be. Um, and a key part of that is loss aversion, right? It's difficult to think about loss. It's difficult to face loss, and most people act as though losing is worse than winning. Like if you the research that they've done when someone say loses $20, they feel much worse than a person who wins $20 feels good. But besides because people are afraid of loss, there's about two-thirds of people who have loss aversion, that they basically don't look at math correctly. They act like they don't understand math, and they would rather um, not win if it means avoiding a loss. And even if the odds were, in their favor to win, they would still, their two-thirds of people act as though they're not good at math. So that's something to keep in mind with this other one. I called it, they call it intertemporal decision making. I call it hyperbolic. uh, the discounting. So, but the difference between time and your decision to make it, and I find these areas to be especially interesting. I don't want to repeat myself from just another video, but intertemporal decision making is in this case is an inconsistency that people have. Like for instance, it actually explains procrastination. So if someone says, I can either spend an hour tonight studying, or I can study 4 days from now for an hour, and they say to themselves, oh, I'll be busy. I'm busy right now. And 4 days from now, I won't have anything to do. So I won't value that hour 4 days from now the way I value my hour right now. And to think of and hours of time in that way is to make a mistake, because then 4 days from now, people say, "Oh, why didn't I do it? I should have done it 4 days ago. I wasn't doing anything back then. Now I'm so busy. I should have done it." And that's intertemporal decision making, the inconsistency between the way people think now and the way people think later. It has the biggest impact, I think, or relevant impact for everybody having to do with savings, right? So I talk to people who have been investing their money, and many of them wish they had started sooner and that they had invested more and that they had done it before then. So all of you who are young, listening to this, your older self wants you to start investing now. And even though it seems expensive and seems distant, you're doing yourself a favor. You're really being nice to your future self. So I'm going to move on down here to the practice what you know. What's an explanation for bounded rationality? And B is a good answer for that one. 34, a flip coin lands on heads 5 times in a row. And Jamie believes the sixth flip will almost certainly land on tails. Well, if it's been doing heads and he thinks that there's a better than 50-50 chance that it's going to land on tails, Jamie thinks there's going to be a reversal, which is an example of the gambler's fallacy. And we got to jump back. I'm not sure we have, no. So we're going to, while I'm on that one, since the answer to this question is the gambler's fallacy, how would we change the question to make it the hot hand fallacy? And for that, Jamie would have to believe that the trend would continue. So if it's been landing on heads, he'll think that it's still going to land on heads. Not that it's a 50-50 chance. He thinks it's a better than 50-50 chance it's going to land on heads again. And if that was the case, it would be the hot hand fallacy. Since the question was asked in a different way, that there'd be a reversal, it's the gambler's fallacy. In reality, it's a 50-50 chance what's going to happen to that coin. All right, last 3 questions. Loss aversion tends to cause people to behave too conservatively and not take enough risks. That's the answer. Number 36, the ultimate game show that people, the ultimatum game shows that people care about. And the ultimatum is explained earlier, and the answer to this is the fairness of payoffs. And lastly, 37, what is true about risks, risk taking, and risk preference? So, risk preferences do vary among different people. That's true. Risk averse people will never engage in activity with an uncertain outcome is not true. All activities involve probability and risk. I'd say that's got some truth to it. I'm always wary of anything that has the word all in a multiple choice question. And people never change their risk preferences. That's not true either, right? Some people are willing to take more risks on vacation than they are when they're just in their day to day or that work. They're willing to they think about one thing and then at the gambling table a different way. So we'll go with risk preferences vary among different people as the best answer on that one. Okay, thank you. Now, for the best part, folks, if you made it this far, I'm going to reward you. Ready? So this is the Unit 4 module, right? When you click on this test, you're going to see something that tells you it's a 40-question test worth $200,000, and it's on those 4 chapters we just went over. I'm going to give you the first line out of each of these questions. When marginal utility is negative, right, that means that total utility is going down, right? Number 2, referring to the following table to answer the following questions. And since we can't see the table, we'll have to skip it over to this one. You'll be able to answer it though. If the price of a good decreases, the marginal utility per dollar. Oh, this is a great answer, right? So if you think about it, let's say that if candy bars go down in price, then what happens to the marginal utility per dollar spent? Go, well, if I got a lot of enjoyment from a candy bar, and now I can get the same amount of enjoyment for less money, then that means I get more utility per dollar. So the answer to that would be more. And what do you think that would cause consumers to do? Buy more or less of it? You'll get the right answer. Number 4, the diamond water paradox was written about by Adam Smith, the father of economics, and he thought it was unusual that diamonds were so expensive, even though they didn't keep people alive, and water was so inexpensive, even though it was essential to life. And that's why he said it was a paradox, something that is true, but doesn't seem like it should be true. But the answer to the diamond water paradox is that the water that we're buying is has a marginal utility that's very small because we've already been drinking a lot of water. And the diamonds that we buy, mostly none of us buy diamonds, and then when we do, we buy it when the marginal utility of the diamond is extremely high. So the amount of diamonds being purchased is rare in your life, and when you do it, it's the marginal utility per dollar of the diamond is very high. And when you buy water, you're not willing to pay much for it because you know you can get it someplace else, and you've already had some water and you don't need it that badly. But if you did need water badly, if it was a matter of life and death, you'd probably trade a ton of diamonds to get some water to save someone that you loved, for instance. Number five. Oop, sorry, no, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. How do we get this off here? Oh, there we go. Indifference curves have to deal with um yes. So it has to do with the consumer choice theory, and I'll let you look that up. But that question about indifference curves is going to be in this one about consumer choice. There's the slide about diamond water paradox. This is the one about optimization and indifference curves. So, oh yeah, I think actually it must have been one indifference curve question. We didn't pull that one up, but we ought to. So the indifference curve slides, I now realize. So that is where you have the same amount of utility from a combination of of goods that are, for instance, someone might say, I am just as happy with these three things and these three quantities as I am with these four things over here with different quantities. And if you're just as happy with two different baskets of goods, then you're indifferent in the amount of joy that you get from it. So, but um, when you have perfect substitutes, then you're going to have a straight line for the indifference curves. When you have perfect complements, you're going to have indifference curves that are at right angles to each other. That's these two slides right here with the indifference curves, which you found were in there. If we come on back to this question, then we can see that question five is indifference curves for something are drawn as straight lines, while indifference curves for something else are drawn as right angles. I'm sure you'll get it right. Someone who's not a morning person is often heard saying, I'm cranky until I've had a cup of coffee. After that first cup, you'll get that question right. And what they're getting is marginal utility, a lot of marginal utility from that first cup of coffee. When does an increase in price produce a substitution effect? When people choose to buy less of that good and more of something else. Question eight, consider the following scenario when answering the following questions. Imagine a game show. Oh, yeah, you'll be able to do that. This one is actually kind of we ought to get into it because there's some math involved. So consider the following scenario when answering the following questions. Imagine a game show on television where one lucky contestant is presented with four upside down buckets. These buckets are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Under one of the buckets is a $100 bill. Under each of the other three buckets is a $10 bill. After the game ends, the contestant will receive the amount of money that is under his or her bucket. So, in other words, if they choose the bucket with $10 underneath it, they win $10. And if they choose a bucket that has $100 under it, they get $100. All right. Now, the host of the game show asks the contestant to choose one of the four buckets. Go ahead. Which one would you choose? One, two, three, or four? Okay, you choose two. So now, after the contestant makes a choice, the host lifts one of the three remaining buckets. They lift up bucket four, and underneath the bucket four, it says there's a $10 bill. At this point, three buckets remain uncovered. The bucket that the contestant originally chose, number two, and the two buckets that were not uncovered by the host, one and three. The host subsequently asked the contestant if he or she would like to keep the original bucket or change buckets to one of the other two buckets remaining. So think about that. If you had chosen bucket two, and then he lifted up bucket four and showed you was the $10 bill there, you knew that maybe you chose the $100 the first time, but maybe the $100 is underneath the one or the three. Would it be better for you to switch to one or three, or would it be better for you to um, keep number two? If the contestant changes buckets from the original bucket to one of the other buckets remaining, what's the expected value of the game? Now, so in the to do these questions, you have to know how to do expected value, and that's just a little bit of math. If you had what we had before was a 25% chance of choosing a $100 bill and a 75% chance of choosing a $10 bill. Because after all, there was under one of these was the $100 bill, and under one of the other three each was $10. So you had a 75% chance of choosing a $10 bill. And when you have a 75% chance of winning 10, then it's 75% of 10 or $7.50. When you have a 25% chance of picking $100, it's 25% of $100 or $25. And then you add those together. You say $25 plus $7.50 is $32.50. And that answer right here, $32.50, is the correct answer if you didn't have this other part to it. The chance, what the expected value of the game was before he took a bucket away was $32.50. But that's not the answer to this question because they're asking what's the expected value of the game now? And just to give you an idea of what we mean by expected value, for those that are good at math, if someone gave you this choice, they say, hey, how would you like to pay $30 to play this game? You give me $30 and I'll show you four buckets. One of these buckets has $100 in it. The other buckets each have $10 in it. Would it be smart for you to play that game, pay $30 to play that game? And the answer is yes, it would be good because the expected payoff for that game is $32.50. That is and if you could play the game for less than $32.50, then you are in favor of winning. And if it costs you more than $32.50 to play the game, then you shouldn't play the game. But and that's what we mean by expected value. Now, what changes up here is that when you take one of the buckets away, now there's not a 75% chance of getting $10. There's a 66% chance of getting $10. And there's a 33% chance of getting $100. So the expected value went up. When you don't have to play with four buckets, you only have to play with three buckets. One of them has $100, the other two have 10. The chance of winning, or that is to say, the chance of finding the $100 bill is now one in three. And so 1/3 of 100 is $33. That's, with a plus change. And the chance of finding a $10 bill is 2/3 or $6.66 if you're doing it that way. So if we added $33.33 plus $6.66, then we'd come up pretty close to 40 bucks. And that's the new answer to that question, as you can see. Boom, boom. All right. And in the context of behavior, oh, shoot. And so forth. Let me see. Well, if you're not bored with that, you can always shut off the video if you don't want to watch it. But let's do number 10. Um, Oh, here, no, number nine. In the context of behavioral economics, the belief that outcomes that have not occurred in the recent past are more or less likely has to do with the hot hand fallacy or the gambler's fallacy. You can figure that out. Suppose a student tosses a fair coin 10 times and gets tails every time. Well, then that sounds like, you're that the chance that the next time you flip the coin is still 50-50, but if you don't think so, you're falling for one of the fallacies. Same thing with number 11. So 10 and 11 are very similar questions to 9. As long as you understand those two fallacies I explained, you'll get 9, 10, and 11 all correct. And 12 too. Consider the following. Corey and Trevor are playing a coin tossing game. Also number 13. Occur when ordering the question they're asked. Oh, yes. Now, question 14 has to do with the priming effect and the framing effect. And 15, in 1980, the Schlitz Brewing Company conducted several beer taste tests. Oh, you're going to love that question. Consider the following scenario when answering the following questions. Derek and Roberto are playing an ultimatum game. So now you know what that is. Where ultimatum is where, um, let's say that I say to you, here's $100, but you can't keep the $100 unless you offer some portion of the $100 to your classmate. And your classmate, it has to just either take it or leave it. There's no negotiation. So you give them an ultimatum. You offer your classmate some portion of that $100. If they say yes, you give them that portion and you keep the rest. If they say no, you got to give the $100 back and neither one of you gets anything. So if Derek and Heriberto were playing that game and one of them offers the other one $1 and the other one turns it down because they're like, I'm not going to take $1 and let you have $99. We can both go with nothing. But if one of them offers, say, $30 and the other one says, I'll take it, you can have 70, I'll have 30, then that would be what the research shows is predictable. So that's the ultimatum game, and it's the difference, it has to do with fairness. It has to do with what people are seem to be doing when they're making choices of that nature. All right, we're halfway through. Consider the following decision tree. Can't answer that one. Experiment 100 students. Got a couple experiments going on 18 and 19. Risk neutral, we didn't mention earlier. So there's people who are risk averse. I said 2/3 of people avoid risk, even if it's bad for them. And it turns out 1 out of 6 are risk lovers. They actually act like they're bad at math as well by taking on risk because it seems to give them a thrill. Whereas risk averse people avoid risk because it gives them extra pain. But a risk neutral person acts like they're good at math. So 1 out of 6 people act like they're good at math, where they kind of calculate the odds and they make their decision based upon what their odds are. It doesn't mean they always win, or it just certainly doesn't mean they always lose. They just play the odds like they understand mathematics and probability. All right. What is central healthcare question that society must find an answer for? That you can answer that one. What is one-cited reason why healthcare expenditures are so high in the United States? We already answered that one. Use the following graph to answer the following. As the manager of an insurance company, Emmanuel is responsible for reviewing the following two plans. Okay. After years of paying all healthcare expenses for employees, the large city's largest employers decided not to offer healthcare. U.S. government's Medicare program is the primary financier or payer of health insurance for the aged, so we know Medicare. Healthcare in Canada is rationed. Computerized medical records have promoted, that's in the reading, low insurance co-payments. Low insurance co-payments cause the consumer demand for healthcare to increase. We just talked about that. How do malpractice lawsuits affect the supply curve for doctors, right? Doctors are less willing to be suppliers because they can get sued for doing their job. So that's kind of caused a decrease in supply. Um, and then we start talking about imports and international good here. But an import Use the following, you got to know the difference between import and export. The difference, by the way, is perspective. If I'm sending it out of the country, we're exporting it. If we're bringing it into the country, it's an import. Use the following graph to answer the following questions. Can't do that one. Trade surplus sounds just what it is. If That's where if you sell more to another country than they sell to you, then you have a trade surplus. The United States has a trade deficit. That's the opposite, where we buy more from other countries than we sell to them. So that's that answer. The following table identifies the real value of exports. Use the following scenario to answer the following questions. Scenario. Yeah. A quota is a limit on production or shipping. So if it's voluntary, you can find an example in there. Exporting nations often agree to voluntary export restraints. And why would they do that? Why would a country that's voluntarily choose not to export too much, right? To avoid dumping, for instance, or to maintain high profits would be my first guess. A possible explanation that a nation might offer for the imposition of a protectionist policy, such as a tariff. We're talking about tariffs here. It's been in the news. When a foreign supplier sells a good below its price, it's charged in the home country. It's called dumping. And that's it. You guys are going to do great. Merry Christmas. Take good care. I'm gonna, I'm posting this now. Let me see. Where's the, uh-huh.